Hi, I'm Jan Ozer. I'm speaking today with Dom Robinson, founder and chief business development officer of Ideas, about the suitability of Ideas' flagship product, Norsk, for OTT and streaming publishers. Thanks for joining me, Dom.
No problem, Jane. Great to see you.
So let's just jump right in. When you say streaming and OTT, tell me the types of customers that you're talking about.
So, what comes to mind when I think about streaming and OTT is live sports, live news, enterprise content for businesses, town halls, that sort of thing, financial news, and then obviously there's a myriad of other types of live video out there, but those are the ones that jump to the forefront of my thinking.
Okay, how are these companies creating their workflows today, and what are their key pain points?
Typically, workflows are building from tools like FFmpeg or GStreamer, amazing tools, very sophisticated tools. I know you know them well, but they require quite a lot of effort to make them do exactly what you want to do. And if what you need them to do falls outside what's already developed, then you have to be in for the long journey to get that custom built into your environment. Another way of doing that is to have someone else pre-build the systems for you and deliver something off the shelf. Off-the-shelf solutions are great when they're great, and when they're not great. So they're very hard to work with. And of course, the typical way for businesses to approach these problems is to hire a systems integrator or a consultancy to build a system for them, which has other risks, has other costs and complications. But those are the main approaches that people take to building streaming and OTT workflows today.
Can you give us a quick overview of Norsk Media, both the components and the deployment workflow?
Yeah, sure. So Norsk Media is a low-code, no-code media server for building anything from simple to highly complex live media workflows. So I'm going to just bring up a slide which will detail a few of the types of capabilities. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is sort of some of the typical capabilities that people want to manipulate using within a workflow. So these might be for video transcoding and for specifically matching video types from one format to another, or it might be much more complex and building the back end for a remote production workflow. There's two components. There's the Norsk SDK, which allows you to use a low-code paradigm. So here's pretty much the simplest Norsk program that you can write. This one simply grabs an input SRT feed and defines an output WebRTC stream and connects the two together. So that's a very simple way, a low-code way for somebody who's really focused on building the user interface, the business solution, and wants to just grab some WebRTC or create some WebRTC from an available SRT source. They don't really want to go diving into codec matching and understanding all the nitty-gritty. So that's what we're trying to do, is abstract the business purpose a little bit from the media. And then there's a second stage, which we're introducing at NAB in the next few weeks, and that's Norsk Studio. So Norsk Studio really takes the paradigm another step further and creates a no-code environment. So you maybe work with some defaults which we can provide into the open source Studio environment, or your developers will create a palette of Canvas tools for you, and then you can drag those onto the canvas, connect them up, create workflows, prototype workflows, and even get to the point where you've got a production-ready workflow designed in Studio, and then you can export that and launch that into the wider Norsk ecosystem to spin those infrastructures up, running those workflows with ultra-high availability and reliability.
How do I glue those pieces together? If you don't have a component for a business goal or a function that I need, how do I create it and how does it work thereafter?
So we'd typically go back to Norsk SDK at that level, and then within Norsk SDK you can build those that type of tooling. You can go right down to the granular detail of how to configure any third-party codec and so on. And once you've built that component exactly as you need it, you can then deploy it within the Studio paradigm, so that if the rest of your web design team need access to that function, they can just bring that into their Studio environment as a block of code, and then connect in the other elements of their workflow, and away they go. And once they're ready, once they're happy, they can deploy that back to infrastructure to run thousands of times concurrently, high availability, and all of those essential elements.
So you're creating components that you can reuse down the road. What's the
Absolutely.
open source nature? Does that help as well?
So by creating a community of people who can share tips, tricks, components, elements that they've built, workflows they've built, we hope to encourage more developers to use Norsk and to share some of those elements back. We think that's a great way for people who are adopting Norsk to show off their skills and get involved in other projects that use Norsk as well. And hopefully, who knows, over time, we may be able to introduce a marketplace or something along those lines.
So you come with a set of components that the individual developers can augment themselves, and there may also be an open source community that's going to be contributing additional components that they can build into their workflows down the road.
Exactly. We would encourage developers to do that and to explore Norsk and to help us build that core bigger and better.
We mentioned a few pain points a few minutes ago as it relates to traditional methods of building workflows. Now that you've described what Norsk does and how it works, take us and tell us how it avoids a lot of those pain points that you just described.
So let's sort of work down a bit of a list. So the big complex systems made up of disparate integrated processes can become complex to integrate and complex to maintain. If you have a different API for each step of your workflow, then you have to keep redeveloping as those components get pulled out, or you just simply get stuck with those components. So integration is complex. Norsk provides a simple API to deal with the media components, which have historically become what I believe the industry term is undifferentiated heavy lifting. It sounds big, it is complicated, but once you've got the system working, it just needs to work for you, and making changes is incredibly difficult in those traditional environments. And to that end, it's also very difficult once you've built a working system to then enhance, innovate, customize it, and make it work with new workflows as the industries evolve and change, which is obviously in the streaming and OTT space happens at a very fast rate, at a very fast pace. Once you get a big complex system, it becomes extremely hard to manage, oversight, accountability. They're difficult, and that problem gets worse just at the wrong time. That gets worse just as you get big, and that's not what you need if you're scaling up. You need to have those problems sorted at ground zero if you're going to build something which is going to deal with global audiences and so on. And we bring 14 years of experience building ultra high availability systems. Norsk has that baked into its DNA. So our motto has always been good on a bad day. We embrace the crash, we build for it, we make our systems really ready to deliver ultra high availability in an environment which actually may be made of infrastructure that's much less highly available than the application we're running on top of it.
And what about canned appliances or canned applications that people may buy to use in their workflows?
Much of the same sort of set of rules to apply. If you've bought something off the shelf and it does what you need it to do, then it's a great solution. It's very hard to beat something that's perfect for its own perfect use case. But if you want your business to be business-led rather than technology-led, sometimes you've got to look for solutions which aren't available off the shelf. And Norsk really strives to provide you that granular control to be able to create those new applications as you need them, rather than to treat them as big monolithic building blocks which have got a lot of impact if you swap them out or are complex to license and so on. So we do think that by moving, this is a paradigm which is not just Norsk, low code and no code as paradigms bring these benefits. We feel like we're bringing them to media.
Why don't you show us a workflow in the Studio interface? I know you can build something a bit more complex than what you've showed us before.
Yeah, so this is a good example. It sort of sits in the middle of the scope of what we can do. This is what the back-end systems behind something like a vision switcher might look like. So there's a little debate about what the terms are and how they translate across the pond. But the piece of kit that you plug 6 cameras or multiple cameras into and you select which cameras lie, we call variously a vision mixer or a vision switcher or a camera switcher. So a camera switcher historically in tools like FFmpeg has been tricky to build. Switching sources, making sure that if a source dies, something else happens to give you continuity of stream. These are things that are complicated to do with traditional media tools because they deal with one job. It's your job to make it do that. So here in Studio, what we've done is we've dragged on a source point, which is the SRT camera source here on the lower left. And that provides an endpoint for SRT cameras to connect into the workflow. We've got a little drag out box here, which gives us a preview. This is really a tool for the studio user, for the local designer of the system. It just gives you confidence as you're developing the workflow that you're connecting to streams and that they're going to the right place. And then,
Always.
so this is our preview window, if you like, and it sort of, if you think about building a live streaming workflow, it's the cables and wires, you know. So the SRT, the main feed of the SRT is going into the Vision Director box here. And in the Vision Director box, when we go live, or we'll show you a slide of it going live in a second, you'll see the various live cameras appear in there. And as soon as it goes live, it'll also play black to give you a continuity of signal. Then off to the right, we're adding a lower third. We're encoding it into an adaptive bitrate ladder so that we can deal with discontinuity errors and things like that, just smooths out the output stream. And then we're mastering that out, in this case, to an HLS and a WebRTC package on the lower right. As the service runs, basically you get previews as you'd expect. You can see here the little arrow has zoomed in on camera 3 because camera 3's gone live and the Vision Director has selected the camera. We've just got a basic form here. This user interface wouldn't be the user interface you'd necessarily want to use in operations. You'd want something looking a little bit more like the picture in the bottom left, which has got the cameras neatly laid out and a take and program kind of window, which a DOP or a Vision Director would typically be familiar with. This is the, if you like, the developer's interface. We would expect that developer to be building a much fancier front end, which is really geared towards the business use case. And so that's kind of how all the pieces fit together. But this gives you the ability to look at that media code. And I think probably just worth mentioning one last thing. We took a remote production workflow interface that we built using more traditional coding methods to build the media back end. And it was a sort of 80-20 balance between the media back end of code being the 80% and 20% of the code being all the front end code. Once we'd replaced that entire application using Norsk, we'd reduced the maybe a few tens of thousands of lines of code to a few hundred lines of code of media workflow, much more succinct, much easier to debug code, describing the same workflow, and we'd switched the ratio. So actually, the user interface code was now the dominant part of the code, not because it had got bigger, but because the media code had got significantly smaller. And for big publishers and OTT sports providers, that provides a much quicker time to market, much more efficiency in your development team, and you can focus really on the front end, which is where you're meeting your customers, not in the back end where you're encoding your video frames.
Yeah, nobody cares about the plumbing. They just expect it to work, and all the
That's
value
right.
is in the interface and the business rules that you build into it. So you've touched on this a couple of times. How does reliability and robustness, how is that built into Norsk? I know it's part of the ideas pedigree, and you've served a lot of customers over a long period of time delivering those type of applications that are very robust and are good on a bad day, as you say. But tell us how that's built into Norsk and how that benefits Norsk customers.
So it is something that we think of as a first-class citizen in our design. So ultra-high availability has to be the sort of platform on which you build your media services rather than a thing that you fit to media services afterwards. So we use slightly esoteric programming languages which allow us to focus on hyperscaling and on supervision of millions of processes and having strategies for dealing with what to do if something does go wrong, because it will go wrong, and it doesn't matter how much you set yourself out to build a system which never goes wrong. Once you've done this a little while in your life, you know that you can't do that. You have to have a strategy for every failure, and essentially the programming paradigms that we use builds that out. That extends not just within the container, which we're kind of looking at here in Studio, as the sort of isolated work process, but that extends to the supervision of all the processes which our Norsk Manager server facilitates. So with Norsk Manager running alongside Norsk Media, Norsk Manager can orchestrate Norsk Media services in a hybrid native way across the infrastructure that you make available to it, and supervise that availability. If something fails, it can reinstantiate the services instantaneously, or it can reprovision them to better infrastructure, depending on various different logics, which either the Norsk Manager can decide, or we can use external input of data to help make those decisions and steer content appropriately. So yes, if you want to really offer service level agreements that are higher than the infrastructure on which you're running the service, you need to have a strategy. And that's baked into the very DNA of Norsk.
And that's all built into the code that they don't see, right? I mean, you've got 1 or 2 lines of code that create an encoding ladder or create a connection. All the robustness that you're talking about is in the plumbing. It's stuff they don't see when they're using
Right.
Studio, or they certainly don't see it in Studio, but they don't even see it in the SDK.
That's right. The SDK is there to describe what you want to happen. We get on, make it happen within the scope of the media framework. So it leaves you to focus much more on the business problem. It might be a front-ended business problem like remote production. It might be simply you want a video standards format transcoding, but you want it to happen right every time and to only let you know if it's actually impossible to reinstantiate it. But we've had systems which have had catastrophic failure of public clouds underneath them, and we've moved the entire service base to another part of the public cloud and reinstantiated a full backup in a different cloud in the space of a sort of few GOPs of video. And that has to be a first principle rather than something that you do by clipboard and pen 2 months after the event, because when it's a premium live event, if you don't do it in the moment, your entire reason for business has just gone out the window.
So you'll be launching Studio at NAB.
Yeah, really excited. We've got our own stand and we've got some demos on other partner stands as well. So come and see us on booth W3417. We'd love to show you Studio.
Okay, Dom, thanks for joining us today.
Cool, brilliant, Jen. Nice to see you.